Welcome to the 9642 podcast. This is your host, Mr. Number 9.
And this is The Fool.
This is where me and The Fool give our
Unqualified and unrequested
ramblings on the various issues in the world of sport.
or something like that.
Hello everyone. We are here to talk today about all the regional oval ball codes they play on these shores.
Yeah.
All of them.
All of them.
Every single one.
Yeah.
And like a general state of affairs with the oval ball codes. Now, we're gonna talk at first with the big guns, the sport that rules the roost in the country we live in, Rugby Union.
Yeah.
Currently, the All Blacks are no longer the best team in the world, be fair to say, but
No.
they're very clearly at least the second best team in the world.
Yeah. Well, they might even be.
I think South Africa still.
Yeah. Yeah.
Again.
I think we've overtaken the Ireland again, right? And France.
Yeah.
I think we slipped down to like fourth, maybe even fifth during the last just before the last World Cup, which was crazy. But
The thing is, with these sort of rugby rankings, I always just think, look, there's no team in the world that I expect the All Blacks not to win against other than South Africa.
apparently we're third as of the 24th of February. Ireland is still slightly ahead of us.
Cool. Ireland being slightly ahead of us in between World Cups is like they do all the time, right?
Yeah.
The right time of decade to have peak with your rugby team, Ireland.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Keep doing what you do.
Yeah, especially in more recent times over the last sort of 10 years, that's sort of definitely been the Ireland way. Like, let's peak in the mid part of the 4-year cycle.
And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because I think most teams are that's when they experiment and rebuild, right? You've got time till the Rugby World Cup to find your combinations in the back line, or figure out the chemistry works with the forwards.
Yeah, especially the second year of the cycle, right? Second year? Yeah, second year of the cycle. Because, anybody that's going to retire that was at the last World Cup is now retired. You've had a chance to sort of deal out a little bit of replacements for that. And now you're starting to run the combinations and really look at what it looks like in the next year is the year, third year in the cycle is where you're starting to get the combinations and get things bedded down and really sort it out for the World Cup year. So, yeah, this is the year of experimentation, right?
It's correctly how it should be done. Like a team like South Africa won't go down because most of their players are being retained. They've got the core that'll stay, and obviously new players will come up and down, and one or two will retire. But it's not going to be a big. It's not going to be a big new team. Like the All Blacks in South Africa seem to move from generations pretty well.
Yeah.
Like, I think our era when we used to watch in the mid to late 90s, like after the likes of Zinzan Brooke and Sean Fitzpatrick retired, like that team that went to the finals in the 95 World Cup.
Yeah.
And then the next 2 years were effectively undefeated.
Yeah.
After that, they would I think New Zealand were kind of doing what Ireland were doing. Like they were peaking in between the years, and Australia would always peak at the right time. Around the World Cup is when their team would start balling.
Yeah. I think that's true just about through the 90s. Yeah.
Other than the 95 World Cup where Australia played awful, even though they were defending champions, that was a really bad performance by that team. And then
it was also probably
91 and 99, they absolutely played it correctly.
Yeah, 95 I feel like they were a little like the 91 All Blacks in that they'd held on to the 91 stars a little bit too long. They were all legends and everything and deserved to go out on their terms, but they all chose to go out a year too late.
I mean, Olo Brown was still playing for the All Blacks in that 95 World Cup team. Obviously he's a legend, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
He was, this is before we had players like Keith Muse, clearly could play into his late 30s and was modern day fitness regimes and things like that.
Yeah.
he still had like Olo Brown and Craig Dowd playing in
Yeah.
those teams, and it took ages to replace that forward line for the All Blacks. Took ages to replace. Like, we didn't have an adequate replacement for Ian Jones. I feel like for a decade.
Yeah, pretty much. You're right.
Like New Zealand, All Blacks would constantly get monstered in the lineouts.
Yeah. That was definitely a problem there. Yeah, say late 90s.
Late
Yeah.
90s, early 2000s.
2000s.
Like obviously,
Yeah.
like every now and then there'd be like, it wasn't just like South Africa or like England with big forward packs dominating us in the lineouts. Like Australia with literally just John Eales would just
I mean,
destroy us.
John Eales still gives me nightmares. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, you say it's literally just him, but he was also like ridiculously good.
Yeah, he was ridiculous. He also kicked goals for
I
his
know.
team.
I know.
So unfair. But yeah, it's not that Australia, because the thing is, those 90s Australia team that didn't do well in the 95 World Cup, and then obviously the New Zealand team that didn't do well in the 2007 World Cup, because at least in 99 and 2003, New Zealand went to the semi-finals.
Yeah.
And they lost to a good team in that semi-finals. Like New Zealand lost to a France team that was like on fire in the 99 World Cup, and then they lost to an Australian team playing in front of their home fans in a semi-final in Stadium Australia.
Yeah. That was always a hard task. I mean, that 2003 semi-final was just.
And that was a classic semi-final.
It was a classic semi-final. I also felt it's like the All Blacks' worst game of that World Cup, which was always disappointing. It's always disappointing when you play the worst game. You're like, we have played better, and like a lot of that is on Australia. Like they did well to contain the New Zealand team. And that 99 World Cup against France. Like, that semi-final, I don't think any team could have won against that France. They just came out and...
Because they were losing in halftime. New Zealand were comfortably ahead.
Yeah, exactly.
And they had the fire in the belly. And like, look, your opponent is allowed to play good.
Yeah.
Let's just say, like, that happens.
That happens, yeah.
You can't, like, it was like the 95 final, which was like a crap game.
Yeah.
Like, it's an incredible moment in South African history and all that stuff. And, I'm not blurring that, but as a rugby game, it was like one of the worst games of rugby.
Yeah. No, definitely. Like I say, for what it represented, it's an awesome moment in history. For the actual game itself, such a poor fest. Like, it's the worst of rugby. Like, rugby gets a reputation for being sometimes boring and sluggish and all the rest, and that game's not the game you show people who have that complaint. Show them the France semi-final, the second half. That's what you should. Like,
And then obviously 2007, infamously, they didn't even make the semi-final. They would get knocked out in the quarters, like the 95 Australian team.
Yeah.
And obviously South Africa they were going to begin like a big period of dominance in both Super Rugby and on the international stage.
Yeah.
Go on. It's now Super Rugby. It's taken many forms. The current format with the Super Rugby Pacifica with their 11 teams, it kind of feels like it's almost back.
Yeah.
I think you could potentially justify another team in the comp who play in maybe Asia again, maybe the Sunwolves. I don't know if they think that. Or a team in Hong Kong or
maybe
Singapore. Something like that.
Yeah.
But I don't think doing multiple cities, if they're all in different countries, works. Like the Sunwolves, if you're gonna have a return of something like the Sunwolves, they have to be a Japan team. They can't be a Japan team that also plays in Hong Kong and also plays in Singapore.
No, it's gotta be a
Try
Japan
and get
team.
local.
Yeah.
It has to be like Japan's thing, right? Like the Jaguars were for Argentina.
Yeah.
100%. And like they were really good because they were Argentina's team.
Yeah.
Like that's what I don't know if they want to go back to those big traveling days if by going
Mm.
to Australia, going to Argentina again.
Yeah, I
The
feel
one,
like they don't want that. Like,
yeah,
yeah, it seems to be very even going to Japan Sunwolves. I feel like that's not desired at this point in time.
yeah. At least Japan, from a time zone perspective, works well
Yeah,
because they're only 4 hours behind. Basically, it's just an hour ahead of Perth,
yeah,
so
exactly.
you've got the time zones pretty much down. Where, like at the moment in the oval ball, if we look at Australasian oval ball as they're all competing with each other, IFL, NRL, and Super Rugby. By the way, the NRL and AFL don't think they're competing with Super Rugby because their numbers are so bad. But
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
Super Rugby still thinks they're competing with
yeah, yeah,
those two codes. Super Rugby, at least from a time zone perspective, like if you're watching games, you start off with a New Zealand game,
yeah.
7 o'clock New Zealand time, which will be 5 in the afternoon in Australia, or even if you have a game around 3 in the, like you can set it up so you have a game every couple of hours, like they do NFL perfectly, right? Like
Yeah,
the
yeah.
time zones are split perfectly, so you've got you can watch
They've been
football all day.
Yeah, and they've been doing that with Super Rugby for ages. Even when it was South Africa was involved, you could pretty much watch Super Rugby from sort of late afternoon New Zealand time when they really wanted to, all the way through to early hours of the morning because you have a South African game. Like they really
Yeah,
did line it up a Saturday afternoon to be like rugby,
yeah,
rugby, 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 rugby.
it worked well for us, but how well does it work in South Africa and Australia as a time zone thing?
Australia probably not so bad because I mean it's still
Yeah,
like only 2 hours, so it's mid. Like they wouldn't play that earlier games in New Zealand, so it would be say 3 or 5 in the afternoon through to midnight. So it'd be a bit better watching South African games in Australia. In South Africa, less so, yes, because they can't really get the first ones. But I mean, it's
yeah,
still
like
during the day for them, right? I suppose the first ones would be like first thing in the morning, and it'd be
yeah,
like a
I think
day of watching rugby.
yeah. It's definitely doable, and like
Mm.
you'd have to build like a sporting culture. Like NRL sort of has a sporting culture around that, right? Like
Yeah.
you've got your Friday night football with late night primetime game,
Mhm.
and then you've got Saturday pretty much from a New Zealand time perspective, like 2 in the afternoon until 10 o'clock at night. You've got Rugby League to watch on Saturday,
Other way
and then
around,
you've
isn't it?
got
It's about
Saturday.
2 Australian, isn't it? I can't remember. But yeah, it is nicely in the afternoon.
Yeah, and like that's one of the reasons why the NRL, like I think it's short-sighted for them not, because they've recently announced they're not going to do an expansion like the 20th expansion team. We know that there's going to be an expansion team. There's 18th expansion team's going to be PNG,
Yeah.
and the the next expansion team is going to be the Bears. We don't know where
Yeah.
and how it's going to play out. And then they've like kind of gone, we don't know about the 20th expansion team, which may or may not be in New Zealand. Like, I don't know how having a second New Zealand team would be interesting, and definitely like there would be local rivalry, and I think the Auckland FC has shown like that
Yeah.
rivalry can become quickly quite heated.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that is a great model for them to see how
Yeah.
that can actually work.
I would not be surprised if the owner of of Auckland FC uh, were might even look to buy an NRL license
Mm.
because he owns a hockey team
Yeah.
and he owns Bournemouth, of course, and he owns FC, AFC, Auckland FC, and he owns he owns an MLS team as well.
All right.
But he's in multiple sports, so
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's possible.
and well, say what you will about American ownership in football in the Premier League. Bournemouth are run meticulously, especially since he's bought Bournemouth. Like
Yeah.
he's right. He bought it for a steal, 250 million.
Yeah.
Like
No.
you think about it now, it's a Premier League club. That's nothing.
Yeah. Exactly. That's such a bargain for a Premier League club.
And the thing is, Bournemouth are one of the few teams and fan bases where if Bournemouth ends up becoming like the Preston North End of the Premier League, the Preston North End are famously the club that is never in contention for qualifying for the playoffs, but they're also never in contention for being relegated.
Yeah.
And they always finish 12th in the championship every year. Because everything else in the championship is chaotic. There'll be like half the teams are getting relegated, half the teams are getting promoted, and then there's like Bristol City and Preston North End. They're just always there. Somewhere between 10th and 14th, that's where they'll finish. Those two.
No.
And there's but if you told Bournemouth that's a club like Bournemouth that's what their fans will bite your hand off to take that.
Yeah, 100%.
We're in the Premier League every year. We get to see great players come to our stadium to play, and we're never in danger of being relegated. I don't care if we never qualify for Europe. That's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think, for 250 million, that's like basically an asset that'll be worth $1 billion in a few years if Bournemouth were to spend, become a club that cements itself as a Premiership member. And it is becoming harder and harder for Championship teams to come up and stay for more than 2 or 3 seasons. Like, the Premier League's no longer the promised land, because the gap keeps widening between the teams that stay versus the teams that just come up.
Yeah.
Like, this is one of the problems that the Ombudsman is gonna have to figure out if it ever gets brought up. But we're not gonna get into the round ball, because that'll be a whole thing.
That is a whole thing. It's almost like we have whole podcasts just on that.
Exactly. Now, Super Rugby is what we were gonna talk about.
Yeah.
Now, last season we had the glorious Blues beat the Chiefs in the final. But finally, after years of underperformance, well, decades really of underperformance, wasn't it? 2 decades with
2 decades of underperformance.
Okay, to be fair, at least the Chiefs won 2 titles in that time, so at least some people in the Auckland region got to celebrate a rugby title. But the whole thing is, the Blues arguably had the strongest rugby catchment area in the world for decades, and they basically threw it away. And there's it's no surprise that they dominated the first 2 seasons of Super Rugby, right? The Blues literally had the All Blacks team plus Christian Cullen. The All Blacks team minus Christian Cullen and Andrew Mertens.
Yeah.
And you replace Andrew Mertens with Carlos Spencer, so it's not a downgrade.
No.
And and I think you replaced Christian Cullen with Xavier Rush, which is a downgrade, but Xavier Rush wasn't bad. He's still pretty good.
It's a downgrade, but that's only because of how good Christian Cullen was. Right.
Yeah, it's not an insult to Xavier Rush. That is basically because Christian Cullen's really, really good.
Exactly.
Now, so they finally, and for years, the Blues were basically the embarrassing child of New Zealand rugby, right? In the 2000s, every franchise, after 2003, for 20 years, every franchise in New Zealand has won Super Rugby. The Highlanders, the Hurricanes, the heck, the Blue Bulls won 3 in a row.
Yeah.
Or the Bulls won 3 in a row. So that the Blues were basically underperforming massively, and they would always threaten to do well. We'd be like, oh, they got Bowden Barrett. Oh, they got Pira Wipu. Oh, they've brought in Tana Umang as a coach. Why did I have hope?
Yeah.
Why?
They really did look at the Warriors model and were like, how about we hype, hope pre-season, and then just be inconsistent for the entire season? How about that?
Yeah. The thing is, the Warriors are the lovable losers.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? They
Yeah.
didn't win the first 2 seasons they were here and make us think they were going to be good forever.
Yeah, exactly.
And they won again with a new team with different players in 2003. So we're like, oh yeah, the Blues, we got it.
Yeah.
And no, like the Warriors, basically every now and then when they're good, we're like, yay, and then but we don't expect it to last. Really.
No, no.
They're like I said, they're the lovable losers, so we don't mind it.
No. The Warriors very much is, yeah. You celebrate the good years because you're like, this is the year I get to feel happy about it all. And then next year, yeah. Regular service back on.
I mean, like the only times when was like the 3 seasons, like 2000, 2001, when we went to the grand final in 2002. Like there's like 3 or 4 seasons where we were regular playoff team. In the early 2000s when it was great, but yeah, once Daniel Anderson had left the team and all that, it was like, yeah, those days are not coming back. We kind of got the greatest coach of all time, but for some reason didn't keep him.
Yeah.
Even though he took our team to the grand final. Yeah.
Yeah.
And now they're on our Penrith are on the 4P. But we will get to Penrith. Currently in Super Rugby, we've already played our first 4 rounds. I want to say 3 rounds. And on the table currently, the Chiefs 3 wins, undefeated.
Woo.
And with a point differential of 51 points. The Reds, this is like the mid-90s all over again. 2 out of 2 so far.
Yeah.
But they didn't play in the first week. They beat Moana Pacifica by 20 points, which I think Moana Pacifica's defense is not that great.
No.
And they beat Force.
Yeah.
Arguably maybe the 2 weakest teams.
I would definitely be arguing that those two. I mean, the Force have 1-2 out of it.
Force, I guess, have 1-2, but yeah.
And they did beat the Brumbies week 2, so that's good from that. But yeah.
Yeah, like they won 45-44 against Moana Pacifica, so like sure they won, but it was close, and I don't think either side would have necessarily played very well from the looks of the scoreline. But they did also manage to beat the Brumbies 45-42. So at least I think we could say these two sides are definitely the weakest defensively.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know. Looking at it, the Brumbies might have a good shout for that. Whilst they won week 1. That was 36-32 over the Fijian draw. And say then losing 45-42 the Force, and again smashed 49-34 by the Chiefs. So, like the Brumbies are scoring points, but they're also leaking lots of points. So that might be an interesting season for them. They're definitely doing the score more, not concede less.
Yeah. Hey, it must be at least fun to be a Force fan. You know lots of points are going to be scored in the games. But the Reds look really solid. Chiefs obviously beating their apparently local rival, the Blues. And they also beat the Crusaders, which you gotta love to see that.
Always good.
And they beat the Brumbies. So there's the top 2 look pretty solid over there. The Highlanders have also won 2 games. They just lost to the Waratahs in Stadium Australia.
Yeah.
And on Valentine's Day, but since then they've been impressive, beating the Blues to retain the Gordon Hunter Trophy.
Yeah.
And they beat Moana Pacifica, but realistically though, I think it's still very early days. I've got another 11 more games to go.
Yeah.
And there will be some early season rust from the looks of it.
Definitely.
With Super Rugby. Looking at the next up, we've got the Blues versus the Brumbies. I know the Blues haven't started well, neither have the Brumbies. And this, if you were to ever have like inter-country rivalries, I think the Brumbies have the biggest rivalries with the New Zealand teams. Like they are arguably bigger rivals with teams like the Crusaders and the Blues than they are rivals of the Waratahs or the Reds.
Yeah, no, I think I would agree with that actually.
Like the Waratahs definitely like they're across the Tasman rival are the Blues and they hate the Reds. Like those are
Yeah.
the two teams. Like um, but the Brumbies I don't think particularly care one way or another about the Reds and the Waratahs, and they go and they're more big rivals with the Crusaders and the Blues because they would always play in the playoffs,
Yeah, exactly.
and like a lot of those Brumbies teams, the good Brumbies teams from the early 2000s that had players like George Gregan and Tom Lane, they would play against All Blacks from the Blues and the Crusaders, so it always heightened that rivalry.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So that's like it's just the way it comes through on in my head.
Yeah.
Moana Pacifica, Fiji, and Drua, like they're gonna build up their rivalries. I think Moana Pacifica will always have a natural rivalry with Fiji and Drua because
Yeah, yeah.
obviously they were two entered in and they're both the Pacific Island teams. And the Pacifica I think will always have a rivalry with the Chiefs and Blues because of their Auckland connections. Effectively,
Yeah.
there's three Auckland teams in Super Rugby.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, two and a third, I guess. And whereas like the the Fiji and Drua, like I think they're now fully in Fiji, right? They play
Yeah.
pretty much all their home games.
The home games Fiji, yeah.
Yeah. At the moment, unfortunately, both those Pacifica teams are bottom of the table, though the Drua managed just missed out on the playoffs last year. They finished seventh.
Yeah,
And
the
but I
Druids,
don't think,
the 3 games they played this year so far have been 3 pretty close losses. 36-32 against the Brumbies, 38-34 against the Hurricanes, and 29-24 against the Waratahs. So, like,
yeah,
the Fiji and Drua are close. They're just not quite there in those matches. So it doesn't take a lot to turn those around.
yeah, absolutely. And is it the top 6 that get through to the playoffs?
Might even be the top 8. Been top, I think it was top 8 last year.
Top 8.
Yeah, top 8 last year. So it's most of the competition get through to the playoffs. I assume they're doing the same again this year, so I'm not 100% with the one less team. Oh, no,
Yeah,
looks like it'll be
'cause
top 6 this year. Sorry.
It'll be top 6 this year. Yeah, that makes more. So Drua did make the playoffs last year. They finished 8th.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Oh,
they finished 7th last year, so they did make the playoffs.
they did. Yeah.
But it's interesting that Super Rugby decided to get rid of the Rebels franchise. It's a weird one. Like, I don't know, like the Storm, as successful as they are, one of the dominant teams of the NRL, is not something that like the locals have embraced in Melbourne. It's always like expatriates who come from rugby countries that like the Storm, or people from out of town. And like most of the people going to Storm games tend to be fans of other rugby league teams
Yeah.
going to watch. But they're super successful, so they've kind of become a part of the the scene, like kind of pushing their way around, breaking down doors and bullying their way into it. Kind of like with the Swans in Sydney. But it's harder for any other like I think round ball code to kind of get in there. Like the Rebels kind of missed a trick by not trying to open like it makes sense why when they started Super Rugby, Australia only had 3 teams. Like,
Yeah.
I think in terms of like number of players and like grassroots and size of everything, Australia was the smallest.
Yeah.
But yeah, and like they kind of shored up the places they thought they were strong. But I don't know. It's very hard to say because Australian rugby are kind of in trouble, right?
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Like the last World Cup, they didn't even make the out of the group stage, and they're hosting the next World Cup. And unless they do really, really well, like they at least make the semis, so like, which would be an incredible result, I think, for this Australian team to get to,
Yeah, yeah,
if it
definitely.
were to happen. Unless they're able to at least do that, it's I think gonna be really hard to win back the public.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think so.
like it's one of those things where NRL and AFL don't really need to rely on how good the Australian team is
Yeah,
for their like AFL doesn't have an Australian team to worry about,
yeah, yeah,
so that's that. And the and for the rugby league, international rugby league is not that big a deal, and plus rugby league has state of origin.
yeah, yeah. I think most
Like,
Australians that follow NRL would look at the state of origin as being more the international quote unquote scene.
like the state of origin is the pinnacle of the game,
Yeah.
right? There's no question. I'm sure people in the northern hemisphere might argue that point. They're wrong.
Yes.
I'm not saying every club in NRL is better than every club in Super League. I'm just saying like when you're when you're combining the quality of every club in the NRL down to two teams, they're better than any club, any side in the world.
Yeah.
And like the Australia is where all the best rugby league players are.
Yeah, yeah,
Like this is why they win the World Cup almost all the time.
yeah. Exactly.
But like rugby league, so they don't need to rely on that. And the issue for both AFL and NRL that they both crave is they don't have rugby's global growth and reach.
Yeah.
Like internationally, rugby's a bigger game than AFL or rugby league.
Yeah,
No
yeah.
question.
No questions at all.
And it's even like got enough. It's popular enough in places like America and Canada that there's some traction. They make money. They're like a top 20 side, and they could beat like in our international rugby at a World Cup. The All Blacks lost to the U.S. rugby team. It would be an upset, but nobody's shocked. Like that can happen.
Yeah.
Like Japan beat South Africa in a World Cup, and like that South Africa won the World Cup. That team.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So you can't. So there's no like the level of competition internationally is closer than ever, especially like from number 10 to 20. Like they've caught up to that top 10 very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And then you've got your club rugby. And Northern Hemisphere club rugby is like way more valuable than Super League or the NRL,
Yeah, yeah,
the Heineken Cup, the European Cup, and all, and then the French rugby. So, but that's also the danger of rugby, right? The club game outside of like England, South Africa, and New Zealand is reliant on the national team to
yeah.
power the popularity in many
Yeah.
ways.
In many ways.
And like because rugby always has five, like at least has six nations up north, and you've got the tri-nations, you're always get a steady supply of that international rugby. But if you've been poor for as long as Australia has been
Yeah.
in that rugby championship, like I think we all think there is a gap between Argentina and Australia. It's not just that Argentina is better than Australia. Argentina is significantly better than Australia. now.
Yeah,
Like
definitely. Yeah. I mean, even
South Africa, Argentina going to Sydney and losing to the Wallabies would be an upset.
Yeah.
In the Rugby Championship.
Exactly. So even Argentina's better than Australia at the moment in the championship.
So like at least if there was like 5 nations in the south, maybe there's a way for Australia to get lucky with a result here and there, and maybe push their way to a that can happen, and it used to happen in the 5 nations back in the day, and 6 nations back in the day. Like every now and then, randomly, you'd get Wales or Scotland winning, because someone England and France would play each other early on, and like there'd be lots of injuries and things
yeah,
like
yeah,
this.
yeah.
You get a lucky run of results when you've got 5 or 6 teams. That can happen. Like it's more of a league versus like a three league competition feels more like a group stage of a of a World Cup,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
Yes.
And even with 4 teams, that's kind of similar.
Yeah, basically the same.
And without and it's not like Wales or Scotland where rugby is arguably one of the most popular sports. Like there's parts of Scotland where rugby is king, and Wales rugby is king.
Yeah.
And in Ireland, rugby is close to being king
Yeah.
in terms of being the most popular. Like obviously Gaelic sports are the most popular, but Gaelic sports are amateur, and nobody else plays Gaelic sports.
Yeah.
Other than people in the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. But so rugby is like the sport that I think rugby and football, obviously, like ignoring that football is obviously the most popular sport.
Yeah.
Like the thing is, like there is still like a big like in Wales and Ireland, the relationship with rugby is not as class oriented as it is in England, and probably Scotland too. It is a big class thing in Scotland as well.
Yeah.
Whereas Wales, is more like New Zealand.
Yeah, where it's the same, right? It's seen as just the sport as opposed to anything to do with class.
Yeah. Yeah, just ignore that most of the people who ended up going to rugby league clubs happen to be from the poorer areas of Auckland and Wellington. And
Yeah. I mean, it still is class-based because that's what it is. But
yeah.
At the same time, it's not in the same thing,
like
England or whatever, and it's like
rugby's not the rich person sport in Wales, in New Zealand, but league is still the working man sport, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a reason why almost every workplace has a league team. Or plays a league game if they've got like a charity game they're playing. They don't play rugby.
Yeah. I guess maybe the better way of looking at it is rugby in New Zealand, Wales is the farming game, or the farmers game, like the country game.
Yeah. That's actually a very good way of, like, until the 90s it was everybody's game, but it's very much increasingly becoming the regional game in New Zealand, right?
Definitely in New Zealand, like if you're out in the regions, it's rugby. It's what people are playing.
Not to say other sports aren't played in the regions. Absolutely not. Like we've seen the stats. Like regional schools have, like, obviously basketball's growing massively in the regions as well, and like rugby league and soccer as well. But union is still king.
Yeah, it's like what I mean is it's like on a Saturday afternoon, the thing that the province does is goes to a rugby game, right? That's what people will do. There might be other kids will be playing other sports in the morning. There might be other sports played other times, but 2 p.m. Saturday afternoon, that's rugby.
High school sports is Saturday in the regions. Whatever that sport happens to be. In large parts of New Zealand, it's rugby, but school sports is still the cult. Like is basically the weekend where you go for your community service and meet together and communally meet up. Like that is, and how the town it's town centers around their weekends around it, like that.
Yeah.
Like lots of towns in New Zealand. Whereas like even if like not saying Auckland, Christchurch, Wellington, even if you live in a town as large as Dunedin, you've got other things you can do
Yeah,
on
yeah,
Saturday.
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Like Saturday morning, you can go have brunch,
Yeah. Oh no, very
drink
much. Yeah.
most.
If it's a big enough centre to not to be called a town, then people will be doing other things. They
Yeah,
yeah. But if you're less than that, then that your weekend, especially Saturday afternoon, is going to be revolved around the sports team, which is Royal New Zealand. More likely there will be a rugby game, and then maybe some other things.
basically, your kids play in the morning, and then you guys and the adults play in the afternoon.
Yeah,
Right? That's the pattern.
yeah.
Whether it's rugby, hockey, football, basketball, that's the pattern. And it's always a team sport.
Yeah.
Where Whereas, like, there's other things, and like, forget Auckland, like, there is obviously still, like, there is still high school Saturday morning sports here, but, it's not the center and be all and end all of everything. There's
Yeah.
things like going to morning markets and, like, going to the beach and thing. Yeah, people just have more to do here. It competes with, like, other stuff.
Almost like Auckland's a big city.
Except not really.
Except not really.
It's just about
Just about. Nearly.
a city. It's just about a city by international standards. Just
Yeah. Just sneaks in.
So rugby in Australia has its problems, and rugby in New Zealand will always, like it's such an ingrained part of New Zealand culture. But it faces the same problems that all the oval ball sports face. CTE, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's still rugby in New Zealand still has its problems throughout, right across the board, and
Heck, the fact that the players decided they were going to form their own rugby union with hookers and blackjack, and almost everybody agreed that that was the right thing to do. Everybody's like, yeah, with hookers and blackjack, that's exactly how you should do it.
yeah.
And like, it's the fact that the players had to go as far as they did, and like the players, like the fact that the rugby players union had showed they understood better how to negotiate and come up with the best deal for New Zealand rugby than the supposed like experts in charge.
Yeah.
There's like really bad administration and leadership issues. Like all the rugby countries in the Southern Hemisphere have issues. South Africa will always have political issues with their rugby. Like currently things are great and great group of players, but there's always like that undercurrent. And rugby, there is the tension of it is the rich person sport and even amongst the white community, it is people who go to private schools and
Yeah.
all that end up playing professional rugby.
Yeah. Exactly.
Like even Talisi, like he's from a township, but he got a scholarship to go to the best school in South Africa. So unless you happen to go to like I think they counted like 4 schools in South Africa, you're not going to be a professional rugby player.
All right.
It's not quite that bad in New Zealand because it's spread, right? Like it's basically going to be a bunch of high schools all over the country.
Yeah. Exactly.
But realistically, it's most of them will get poached by Auckland Grammar.
Yeah, or St Kitts.
At some point.
So I think the thing is that outside of Auckland, it doesn't really matter. Inside Auckland is like Auckland Grammar, St Kitts, Kings. That's it.
Yeah. If you don't go to one of like those schools, like even a school like Kelston Boys, proud tradition of rugby, as we know, like used to be world champions.
Yeah.
For a long time, and they can't compete.
No. Those other 3 these days just look at the other schools as feeder schools for their first 15.
Yeah. Well, they're technically not allowed to poach players inside Auckland.
Oh yeah.
which they don't. They specifically poach players from the rest of the country.
Yeah, that's right.
They're like, yeah, we don't want to like piss in our own swimming pool.
No, let's
But
go.
we're totally gonna bring like turds from other places and drop them in.
And let's go to St. Kitts. St. Kitts don't care.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, St. Kitts, it actually made the news 2 years ago, where they were like poaching other Auckland schools players, and it was a big problem. And then it was like they're like, no, point to the rule book where it says we can't, and everybody's like, oh, we haven't actually written anything down, have we? And like, no, you haven't.
Okay.
So all good for us.
So it was one of those. It was one of those. There's no rule saying a dog can't play basketball. Like
Pretty much. That was pretty much their defense, I remember, which was, we haven't done anything technically wrong.
As opposed to in Futurama, when Ultimate Robot fighting, they're like, there's no rule saying a robot can't be a human, and the guy's like, here, rule number 1. Humans can't play in Ultimate Robot fighting.
Yeah, I think there was technically a rule for it, but St. Kitts was getting around it with a like really obvious.
I think there was never a rule. There was a gentleman's agreement.
Yeah,
which is more important if you're rugby.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Exactly. No, it was. That's right. No, there was a rule, but it was you weren't meant to offer. You weren't meant to offer a scholarship with the sweetener of playing for the first 15 or something like that. Like they couldn't say, come to our school and you'll play for the first 15. But they go around by going, come to our school and we'll give you a scholarship. Well, first 15, what's that? Oh, you're really good at rugby. Oh, that's weird. That's not at all at our considerations. We just think you're really smart. Yes, smart. Please come to our school.
It is, like, any school is allowed to give a scholarship to any student. They're a private school, and that's fine.
That's fine. It was just, it just happened to go to all the really good rugby players at the other Auckland schools.
Yes. But there was clearly some sort of gentleman's agreement at least, because Auckland boys specifically did not. They went out of their way not to poach anyone from Auckland and offered all their rugby scholarships to people living outside of the super city.
Yeah.
You know, including people who like lived in places like Pocono and all that. They're like, technically they don't live in Auckland.
Actually, I'm pretty sure Auckland boys are pretty good. I know they don't, not everyone, but they're pretty good at scouring the country. Like they go pretty far afield to.
But they're Auckland boys everywhere. Yeah. Just like you'll always find a random South Sydney fan everywhere.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. You know, like you'll go to like the top of Mount Everest. There'll already be a guy on the top, and he'll be wearing a Souths jersey. Like you can guarantee
it. Yes.
That's gonna happen. But if we're going back to the Super Rugby,
back to topic.
We review back to topic. Looking at the games, so I would expect the Blues to beat the Brumbies, just because I expect the Blues at some point to start playing better as the season progresses.
Yeah.
And the Drua, like I said, they've been playing really well. This is their opportunity to turn their season around, but I think the Chiefs are in imperious form, so I would be backing them. The Moana Pacifica play the Hurricanes. Once again, I think the Hurricanes look like they're in great form this season. And Moana Pacifica's defense needs a lot of work, so I would be backing them. The Waratahs versus the Force is an interesting game. I would not. Technically, it's fourth place versus fifth place. It's very, very close. The Force have won both games, and they've traveled pretty well this season. So I think they will, and they have no problem scoring. I feel like the Force might get that one.
Possibly, yeah.
Over the Waratahs.
The Waratahs looked very good as well, so, I mean, only 2 games. They had the bye as well.
Yeah.
So, it'd be interesting to see. Hey, you said it's an interesting game, right? The Waratahs have
Yeah,
looked
yeah.
quite good. Traditionally, they're pretty decent. The Force at home, the Force are always great. Traveling, they've always not been quite as good. And this is in Sydney, so I might actually give it to the Waratahs because it's in
Going the,
Sydney. They've looked pretty good, but it could go either way.
going the Tars.
Yeah, I got the
And
Tars.
then we've got the Red and Blacks versus the Reds.
Yeah.
Crusaders versus Reds. Home in Christchurch. Crusaders, once again, they've been rebuilding for the last few years.
Yeah.
But obviously, you can never count the Crusaders out, but they've looked terrible. They haven't looked the best in the 2 games they've played this season. But I do think the Crusaders will pick themselves up. Like they've had 1 loss, 1 win. But I expect the Crusaders to pick themselves up. They'll probably win because it's at home in Christchurch in front of their fans.
Exactly. So, say the Reds have been also doing very well, but they've sort of played weaker teams. I think the Crusaders are
Yeah,
going to be too.
I think so too. Now, moving on to the other rugby code. It's funny. Apparently in Melbourne they call Rugby League rugby.
Really? Oh, that's funny.
Like, oh, let's go watch the rugby when they're talking about going to the Storm game. NRL, we've had our opener. Obviously, do not be fooled by first round jitters. The Warriors are obviously gonna win this season.
Yeah, it's our year,
This is just
obviously.
somehow without Sean Johnson.
Yeah. But we're doing it for his memory and for him, right? He couldn't do it when he's here, so now we've got to, last year was just we were sad for not having him. This year, we'll show him, the greatness that is the Warriors.
Yeah, and we've still got RTS.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that is actually a decent Warriors team.
Yeah, there's nothing on paper to say why the Warriors can't be competitive, but we're Warriors fans. We know.
We know
what might. They unfortunately lost their game to the Canberra Raiders. A game that's always tightly competed, usually between the Green Machine and the Waz, but they've absolutely spanked us in Vegas. And the other one, defending champions, Penrith Panthers, to nobody's surprise, beats the Sharks.
Yeah, say to nobody's surprise.
The Sharkies, they tried. It was closer. It was close on paper, but not really. The Sharkies look pretty impressive, though. I wouldn't be surprised if they had a good season. Next, coming up tomorrow on Thursday, we've got the Roosters playing the Broncos in Sydney. I think
Always
that's
a big
going to
match.
be always a big match. Followed by the West Tigers playing the Knights. Now, the Roosters Broncos, that's going to be a tough one to call. I still think the Broncos, they always start well in the season. The Roosters tend to have issues which they'll fix and sort out.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, right? Roosters are generally slower starters, he says tentatively.
Yeah, and so I think the Broncos are gonna take that one.
Yeah.
I
do think it will be an interesting game to see where both those teams are at.
Yeah.
Like it's a good first game for both of them. Like you say.
Yeah.
Roosters generally do start a little bit weaker and work out their problems pretty quickly and sort it out. So it'll be interesting to see where they're at, and same with the Broncos. But the Broncos last year, much like the Warriors, had quite a poor year. In fact, probably as bad a year as the Warriors, given that same as the year before they'd finished top 4 as well. So,
But we always expect the Broncos to never be bad for long.
Yeah, well, exactly. So you expect them to bounce back. So it'd be interesting this year, that first game, to see where they're at, see how they're placed going into the season.
And we've got the West Tigers playing against the Knights. The West Tigers arguably are the most interesting team in the NRL. There's always something happening.
Yeah.
Currently, Benji Marshall, their greatest ever player, their coach. Tigers coming off 3 seasons in a row with the wooden spoon,
Yeah.
the tough life, and they're coming up against the Knights, who are always competitive.
Yeah.
And I think we are gonna see the Knights go down to West Sydney and smash the Tigers, unfortunately. Sorry, Benji.
But once again, it's an interesting game for the Tigers, right?
Yeah.
To see where they're at. If
Yeah,
they could
I
be
mean, I'd love to
competitive,
see
then
the
maybe
Tigers.
good.
I'd love to see the Tigers have a good season.
Yeah.
I think they're a great club, and they're like, they're like the one West Sydney club where the fans are not toxic, and like it's,
Yeah.
they still have those West Sydney values, but it's not a it's not that toxic level of fandom that a lot of the Sydney clubs have.
Yeah.
But the Knights are the Knights, unfortunately. Uh, Next up, we have the Dolphins playing against the Bunnies on Friday, 10 p.m. Now, obviously, I think everybody on paper thinks the Bunnies, because the Dolphins have been, they've been pretty good for the first 2 seasons. They haven't wowed, but we know who their coach is.
Yeah.
And we know he's not going to be he's going to get his team humming at some point. And there's a reason why he's arguably one of the GOATs in coaching, right?
Exactly.
And as Phil, like, I was watching this interview where Phil Gould was talking about Wayne Bennett, and he literally came out and said, look, Wayne Bennett has no other interests other than rugby league. He doesn't play golf, he doesn't smoke, he doesn't drink, he doesn't go out to parties. He coaches rugby league, goes home and chills with his wife. That is all he does. He's like he's gonna be coaching rugby league teams till he's in his hundreds.
Yeah.
He's like, I have a life. This is why I retired. He doesn't play pokies. He doesn't do horses. He doesn't watch other sport. He only cares about rugby league.
Yeah. Him saying that, I just think like, yeah, that 100% checks out.
That tracks.
That tracks. Like, I can understand that.
Like, in terms of coaching ability, Phil Gould is just as good as Wayne Bennett, right? But you can tell Phil Gould probably cares about stuff outside of rugby league. Like, you're a normal person who happens to be a good coach.
Yeah, exactly.
Wayne Bennett's a great coach who also happens to be technically a human being as well.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
As opposed to like a rugby league robot, like in human flesh. But it's the thing. I think the Dolphins are gonna have a big season. This is third season for Wayne. This is his opportunity to prove he's got something there, right?
Yeah.
He's got to show it to the league. Obviously, we know that the NRL wants to shore up Queensland. AFL's moving into that territory, so it's important that the Dolphins do well.
Yeah.
And they arguably could have a fourth Brisbane team, because Gold Coast is effectively a Brisbane team.
Yeah.
Even though they're terrible. But yeah, sometimes wonder if Gold Coast is the city in Australia where franchises go to die, because it's the same with AFL. Gold Coast Suns are terrible.
Yeah.
Now,
that way.
Yeah. But as I said, I do think the Dolphins are going to do well. So this is the only. But I do think the Bunnies will do well in the rest of the season. I just feel like the Dolphins will pull an upset.
Yeah.
Next, Dragons versus Bulldogs. Then George, Illawarra, at home, Bulldogs. Sorry, doggy fans. Don't feel it for you guys this year. I just don't feel it.
No.
I think the Dragons are going to be too strong, especially at home. Next up, we have the Manly Sea Eagles versus the North Queensland Cowboys. This is being played in Manly. No surprises. I expect Manly to win.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's gonna be. It'll be a tough game. Cowboys will make them work for it. but I think the Eagles, they're a strong team. They're gonna do really well. And finally, we've got the Storm versus the Eels in Melbourne. I hate to be that guy, but yeah, I'm predicting the Eels to lose. I'm predicting every West Sydney team to lose this opening. Because I said that I thought the Tigers would lose, I thought the Bulldogs would lose, and I thought the Eels would lose. Okay, no, I didn't think obviously the Panthers won, but I wouldn't predict the Panthers to lose because
No,
obviously
no.
they're going to win almost every game.
Yeah, yeah.
And look comfortable doing it. But it helps when you've got the best coach and the best player in the game.
100%.
But yeah, they could have both been Warriors. They could have.
It is sad to think. Yeah.
Like, you imagine if he played for the Kiwis as well, Nathan Cleary. Would have been so good. He's an Auckland junior. We've created the GOAT.
We have.
But, you know, he never played a moment of professional rugby for us. But who do you like for playoffs? Like, obviously we're both predicting the Warriors go to the playoffs, right? Like,
Yeah.
which are the other 7? Obviously Penrith.
Obviously Penrith. So we've got Penrith, Broncos. Who else?
What do you think about the Raiders?
Raiders. Maybe. Yeah, probably. I think we're talking top 8. Most likely Storm, obviously. Seagulls.
Yes.
5?
Storm. Let's say the ones that we think, obviously. Sea Eagles, Storm,
Storm.
Panthers, Warriors.
Panthers,
So those are the
Warriors.
4 we definitely think.
Yeah. I'd stick Rabbitohs in there.
Yep. Rabbits. Yep. Bunnies. I think the Roosters.
Roosters, yeah.
So we like the Roosters and the Bunnies.
Yeah.
I picked the Dolphins, so I'm gonna stick with that. And I think Broncos as
think
well. So that was
Broncos.
my 8.
Yeah, who else?
So if you don't like the Dolphins, you could pick, I don't know, the Knights are, I think, pretty... This is the thing, I think it's between the Knights and the Dolphins for that 8th team.
I think, yeah, Knights, Dolphins, Dragons, all going to be pretty close in there. Sharks, like these all teams, I think that would be potentially in there as well. I'd probably go the Knights if I had to pick one of them. Thinking, I don't really feel the Dolphins. I know, like, you know, you got Wayne Bennett there, so you can never count them out. Like, he will find a way to coach them into something awesome. Like, as you say, that's what he does.
Look, given the players he has, how well they've done is really impressive.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like hard being like, nah, they're not going to do anything.
He's Wayne Bennett. Like, you know, water is wet, air is breathable. Like, you know.
Yeah, Wayne Bennett has a playoff contending team. Like, it's just...
That's just something you expect would happen.
Yeah, exactly.
But, yeah. And I'll call it now. And this might be foolish. West Tigers will not get the wooden spoon this year.
Ooh, that's a big call.
That is a really big call.
Yeah. Who do you think's getting the wooden spoon then?
I hate to say it. Let's see. I think it will be the Titans.
Yeah, well, that's not a bad thought either, really. I'm not sure how. I haven't seen much of the Eels pre-season, but that would be my other thought as well.
The Eels are another one where I'm like, the Eels are the Titans, but I'm just like, the Eels have something.
Yeah.
I feel something when I look at the Rugby League, Eels play in their Rugby League games, even if it's awful to watch. I don't feel anything when I see the Titans play. It's like looking at roadkill of possums. I'm like, okay, whatever. So on that note, I think the Eels won't get the wooden spoon.
Pickle.
Yeah. Yeah. So now moving on to the Australia's game, the
Mhm.
AFL. They've yet to start their season because they've had 2 games postponed due to the cyclone, which is obviously awful. Um, Following on, they had an incredible season last year where the Sydney Swans made it all the way to the top of the Premiers, and then they went all the way to the finals, but lost to Brisbane.
Yeah.
Nah, absolutely got smashed, in fact, by Brisbane in the final. After it looked like the Swans were like on form, they hardly broke a sweat in the playoffs,
Yeah. Exactly.
and like just be interesting to see how they recover from that. Um, Currently in the teams we've got so Brisbane playing Geelong, that's been postponed,
Yeah.
and Gold Coast playing Essendon has been postponed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Come on, like the one game I was gonna watch this year, which Essendon was gonna win. Why?
Still have to play
Then
it, so it'll be fine.
true, true. So next, first up, we've got Sydney playing Hawthorn. I do think the Swans have a lot to prove. I
Yeah.
do. Hawthorn obviously are always competitive, but I do think the Swans got it. They're gonna get the they're gonna get through. They're gonna win that game. Then we've got the GWS Giants versus Collingwood.
Yeah.
GWS, it's a weird Frankenstein monster that shouldn't work, but somehow does. Like they've made it to 2 grand finals already. They're one of the newest expansion teams that came in with the Gold Coast Suns, who are absolutely useless, as I've mentioned before. The Giants, on paper, should not work. They're in West Sydney, which is Rugby League territory. They have no fans coming into their games, and they play half their games in Canberra, which is a completely different demographic of people
Yeah.
who you need to attract. Canberra being, it's a high student crowd or rich, Canberra's one of the highest income cities in Australia,
Yeah.
or at least there's enough people there in high income, which makes it an expensive sort of like, upper city plus students, right? That's
Yeah. Yeah.
their demographic versus like West Sydney, which is an post-industrial outer suburb kind of,
Yeah.
area with many working class neighborhoods, and like it is the heart of rugby league, not maybe the world, not just in Australia.
Yeah. 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 Exactly.
Like that, basically, Manchester and West Sydney are like the heart of rugby league.
Yeah.
Those are the 2 areas, like Greater Manchester, like and the West Sydney. So the GWS are this, and also like they've got a really good soccer team as well in that from that region, who are well supported by the local community. And so
Yeah.
GWS always has trouble trying to attract local fans, and like AFL fans already have the Swans.
Yeah.
And like a lot of people who like other AFL teams in Sydney are Swans members because they get to go to AFL games to watch. And the Swans are pretty good. The Giants, I think, are really good as well. Like, so and I don't like Collingwood, so I think Giants are gonna win. And I don't like saying anything good about Collingwood if I can help it. Next up, we've got Richmond and Carlton. Another Melbourne derby. I think Richmond have had a really good off-season, building up their squad. Like they got the wooden spoon and they got the good draft picks. I think it'll still take them a while to push ahead. Carlton made it to the playoffs last year. Like 50% of the team, even if I don't think Carlton will make it back this year, I think Carlton are going to win that game.
Alright.
Then we've got the Hawks. Hawthorn play against Essendon. Yeah. As I said, Hawthorn are a team that are always good. Essendon are a team that I support. So, pain. I'm going to be hopeful. I think Essendon will sneak in a victory somehow.
Somehow it'll work.
Somehow it'll work. But realistically, if you're thinking about betting, don't follow my advice. Next, we've got the Geelong Cats playing against the Dockers. I think Geelong kind of really underperformed last year. They still had the core of that really good side that won the title. They came third, and they didn't go far enough in the playoffs. I think they would be quite disappointed in how they did. But I think they're still really good, and I don't rate the Dockers. I think the Geelong are gonna win. Sydney versus Brisbane, a replay of the grand final.
Yeah.
The game of the round. Clearly, I think Sydney are really, really good. Lots to prove. I do think they're going to try their best to win this game. And they've been prepping for a game since last week, so they're possibly in better condition.
Yeah.
I think Sydney will just sneak it in, but that doesn't mean Brisbane won't beat them in the return fixture this season or in the playoffs should they meet at some point.
Yeah.
Then we've got Collingwood versus Port. Like I said, I don't like predicting good things for Collingwood, but I think Port are doing great things. They came second last year.
Yeah.
Core of that team is still there. I think the Power are gonna go. Even though it's being played in Melbourne, this is the opportunity. The Power need to show that they're ready to compete, so they have to go to Melbourne and beat the big guns if they want to do that.
Yeah.
So I'm picking Port. Then we've got the Western Bulldogs versus North Melbourne Demons. I think the Bulldogs are slowly building a really nice team, and I would love to see how well they can go with this team. And this is like an ideal opportunity for them to show against. I think North Melbourne, unfortunately, are not in the best situation. They've obviously got this. They were the second to bottom last year.
Yeah.
And they got the second overall the draft. But yeah, I think the Bulldogs are going to win this one. Then we've got the Crows, Adelaide, playing the St Kilda Saints. Awful news for St Kilda. They have all this money and they keep trying to attract players who have consistently told them to fuck off. Had a player turn down a $17 million contract. They'd rather not play for the Saints.
Ooh.
Ouch.
That is ouch.
So, terrible things off the season, and it's the Saints. There's never good news for them. But there might be they might have a lot to prove, and they'll play really, really well, I think. But ultimately, I think the Crows are too strong. They're not gonna beat the Crows. Then we've got the Melbourne versus the GWS Giants. Melbourne, they missed out on the playoffs last year. I think GWS Giants are one of the best teams in the league, so I do think the Giants are going to win that. Then we've got the West Coast Eagles versus the Gold Coast. Eagles have been terrible for the last 3 or 4 seasons. And while they don't look good, they are up against what I consider to be the worst team in the league, which is the Gold Coast Suns. So I expect them to go ahead and win from there. Yeah. What would you think? What are you thinking for your top 8 to make the?
I mean, I'm not the most versed on AFL for it, but I mean, you have to go with Sydney and Brisbane at the top, right?
Sydney, Brisbane. I think Sydney, Brisbane, GWS. We can pretty much assume.
Yeah. Geelong as well are normally pretty good.
Yeah, I agree with Geelong.
Yeah.
I think those and Port.
And Port Adelaide.
Those 5 are probably, I think, very, very likely, and after that, it's very much open season. Like the other three spots, you could have a Bulldogs, you could have Carlton, you could have Collingwood. Heck, you could even have St Kilda pull up.
Yeah.
But I think Collingwood, just because they always seem to eventually come back,
Yeah.
and the West Coast are threatening to be good this year. We don't know. Heck, even Essendon weren't too far behind. They were only a
6 points
couple
behind
of games.
last year.
Yeah.
Carlton made it through in the 8th on 52, and then Collingwood also on 52. Fremantle 50, Essendon 46, or St Kilda on 44, or a handful.
Yeah. So I think, while I think of the remaining pack, the Bulldogs look the best. But anything can happen. These are all squads where they're weak enough that a big injury will obviously throw everything away. And I think but also similarly, if a team gets into momentum, they could push themselves into like a 7th or 6th place spot quite easily, and then have a deep playoff run. I don't even know what that feels like anymore as an Essendon fan, a deep playoff run. But the other team that could, and they're like, shout out to my younger brother who hates this team, for the Fremantle Dockers, could go pretty far ahead. It would be nice for the last few years Fremantle's been finishing on top of the Eagles in the table, so they've had the ability to lord it over their neighbors. I'm pretty sure the Eagles fans just show their 3 premiership trophies in the clubhouse and we're like, oh yeah, where's yours, guys? How many do you guys have again?
Yeah, exactly.
Even St Kilda has one. But at the end of the day, it'll be a very, very interesting season. The game, AFL is what makes it fun, I think, as a sport to follow, is that it's so often you have a change in that top 8 every year. There's a decent amount of recycling of the Premier League teams. Like I said, we named 5, and I think on average every year 4 teams that made it to the playoffs miss out. 50% miss out, which I think is ideal for a league that has no relegation and has a playoff structure.
Yeah.
Because that proves your league is competitive in the mid-level. So there is this pathway for teams to move up to the top.
Yeah.
And I think ideally that's what you like. That's one of the problems with the NBA. I think 5 seasons, the same 8 teams from each conference was making it to the finals.
Yeah.
So they had to design the play-in tournament and things like that to make it more competitive. And I don't think you need to do anything like that in AFL. But it will be interesting. After next season, we'll have a 19th team.
Ooh.
With the Tasmanian Devils joining.
Yeah.
That episode of Utopia has come true.
Oh.
You know how they said they were gonna. Anybody who at home who hasn't watched Utopia, it's basically like the Australian version of The Office, but a million times better because it's actually like a workplace. And they actually deal with workplace drama as opposed to people goofing around, not working, which is what The Office is.
Yeah.
90% about. This is actually like workplace drama, and the show works in this fictional government office that builds infrastructure projects for Australia, and they basically decide, because they get a bunch of complaints from Tasmanians, we'll go to Tasmania and do a bunch of town halls along the island and see what the people want, and then we'll give our proposal to the government about what they should spend in the budget for Australia. And then they go there, and then they come back going, it was really good. We had a bunch of trips. Tasmanians want really sensible things: better roads, better rail, more port infrastructure, hospitals, and things like this. And then the guy who's the government rep goes, well, we want to build a stadium. And like they tried to, so obviously they get kind of forced into trying to do a feasibility study for the stadium. And one of the things they said is like, do they have an AFL team? And they go, nope, and they're unlikely to get one. But now they have one, and they're gonna build a stadium. Because they were talking about things like, oh yeah, what about in cricket? What was the? It's like, yeah, we had a crowd of like, we had a crowd of crowds of like 5,000 going to in the Sheffield Shield last season, and they're like, oh, see, that was pretty good. It was Ricky Ponting's last season, and things. Everybody's like, okay, like maybe don't
count that one.
Don't count that one then. But yeah, it's great that the state of Tasmania gets a team,
Yeah.
and hopefully the island all get like in that particular episode. One of the reasons they end up not building the stadium is they get into an argument of whether it should be in Hobart or Launceston, and then they're like, okay, no, this has become too toxic. The IRL AFL team, I'm sure, might play games around the whole island, but their main stadium will be in Hobart, which is what they're building.
Yeah.
I think they said a 30,000 seater stadium, so that'd be interesting.
Oh, that is pretty interesting, actually.
Because the Bellerive Oval is only like 4,000 people. I think.
Yeah.
Like
not particularly big, right? Yeah.
Not particularly big. But it's fine for Tasmania. It's perfectly adequate, and I'm sure it's a great ground to watch the cricket in.
Yeah.
Not that I've ever been there, because it looks great on TV.
Yeah.
So look, yeah, that'll be interesting. So AFL are having their own what is going to be our 20th team dilemma, because they have to decide whether they want a third, either a third South Australia or West Australia team. I think they're pretty much concentrated in Victoria. They probably wouldn't want to put another team there. And that you've already moved to Tasmania, that kind of just leaves either you're going to New Zealand, which is pie in the sky stuff.
Yeah, very much pie in the sky stuff, but yes.
Yes, we could get into an AFL team.
Yeah.
I'm not doing anything. The Bombers aren't doing anything. I could easily have a second bandwagon team that I go to local games to watch, but there's realistically, there's no facilities here.
No.
Like, the AFL did say that if New Zealand Cricket built the ground in Western Springs for cricket, specifically for red ball cricket, that they would be keen to be a permanent tenant for an AFL team there.
All right,
it would be a team owned by the AFL, obviously, because they project that they wouldn't have enough members and things like that to sustain the league, which is correct, by the way.
But
they would need to babysit this team. And not saying AFL can't pick up here, absolutely can. Look how popular basketball got with the Breakers.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's entirely possible. And so it would be really interesting if it was New Zealand, but I think they want potentially to have a third Queensland team, but currently there's only like one good Queensland team. Even another New South Wales team, maybe Wagga Wagga, Canberra.
Yeah.
Like, effectively, from what I understand, Canberra, until the 80s, was like a half and half town. It was literally on the border of what they call the Barassi line, which is where Aussie rules and, like, there's like a diagonal line across New South Wales where it's like, where Aussie rules and NRL, like, fight over. And the Canberra was a city which was like 50-50, like Wagga Wagga is today. But like, because they made the the NRL started with the Raiders, like and then eventually the Brumbies came. Like, Canberra became a rugby town, like both Rugby Union and Rugby League. Like, I think Canberra's probably the one city in Australia where rugby was legitimately the most popular sport, like Rugby Union.
Yeah.
Like obviously Brisbane, Sydney liked rugby, but it was never the most popular sport there.
Yeah.
Whereas Canberra, like, they love the Brumbies, right? And
Yeah,
like
yeah,
the
exactly.
Brumbies and Raiders fans are usually like, it's a circle, that subset. There's no inter. The whole
Yeah,
intersection is one circle.
yeah,
And like I said, like they could have totally made, or they could have totally made the GW Greater Western Sydney, instead of being Greater Western Sydney, uh, they have a Canberra team and a Western Sydney team instead of the Gold Coast Suns, and they could have probably solved that problem, because
yeah,
Canberra will support any, like, and sports games held in Canberra sell out because
yeah,
people have money,
yeah,
and the people you sell the student tickets to will go as well.
yeah, 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 yeah.
So the big thing, because with the way time zones work in Australia, because you've got Sydney, Adelaide, and Perth all on the different time zones, you literally can start, like, you can literally start at 2 in the afternoon all the way to nighttime watching AFL games.
Yeah, which is always good.
Yeah. Which is like what NRL wants, which is why, NRL are always sort of looking at Perth, because that gives that extra time zone uh,
Yeah,
for games. And the like, I don't think Adelaide will ever take to Rugby Union or Rugby League.
no.
Like, just about take to soccer, and that's about it.
Well, I mean, yeah,
And
the Adelaide football team, not to drift into round ball again, but they're doing really well in the A League,
yes,
so that would
yeah,
be helping that along quite a lot.
yeah, and like, Adelaide's still a one-team town when it
Yeah,
comes to the round ball, and they've got two AFL teams. And to be fair, if Adelaide were to have a third AFL team, um, it would be I can't remember the name of the club. Is it not Carl? It starts with C, but they are basically the biggest. Norfolk, sorry, not starts with Norfolk, are the club that was supposed to end up getting the AFL license,
all right.
and they basically they got the AFL when the VFL expanded into Adelaide. They got the license, but they basically backstabbed the rest of South Australia uh, football league, and they took them to court, and then they got that license off them,
Oh,
and then they were supposed to get the license with the Port Adelaide Power, and then they once again tried to pull the backstab move and couldn't get that license. So they're still, don't have a AFL, but they're still super popular. The club still has like 40,000 members and things like this. So
oh wow.
so there's a club there, like
Yeah,
they
yeah, yeah,
that could immediately go in and, like, in a few seasons be competitive after a few draft picks and all that sort of thing
yeah,
to help them out. So there is room for if they wanted to just strength up. And like, this is how I think the AFL does it. They're more conservative than the NRL. They don't like to go and build a team. Like, the NRL tried to have a team in Adelaide, and they tried to have a team in Perth. They had tried
yeah,
to have a team in so many places to try and push the sport.
yeah,
Whereas I don't think that will, like, the AFL is always very conservative about it. So we'll see how it plays out. I guess the other thing is, like, the NRL are kind of getting a government-sponsored franchise in PNG
yeah.
as a soft look. By the way, I think I am not by any means an expert in Australian geopolitics or foreign affairs policy, but that seems like a very good way to compete with, the influence of other regional powers in our part of the world. Like, like, other people might have more money, but they can't give you an NRL franchise, can they?
No.
And if that's what you actually want,
Yeah, well,
money will
exactly.
not do. that's what you long for. You're not gonna want the money. You're gonna want the NRL franchise.
Exactly.
And like I'm sure that PNG franchise will get plenty of good sponsorship from really, really uh, rich and wealthy mining companies that need to improve their reputation in New Guinea for some reason.
Yeah, yeah.
No reason at all. They just want to sponsor local communities
They
and all that,
really
right?
they really care about the local people. They want to be seen to be putting back into the community.
Exactly. Well, it just like as a Warriors fan, I have no right to say it won't work. Because if you think about it, realistically, the Warriors is the best you could expect from an expansion team
Yeah,
in the NRL. Like the Storm is not something you can expect. That's miraculously good. Like ridiculously good to have a team that's always competitive as an expansion team and like always there.
yeah,
Or
yeah, yeah.
thereabouts. And like they have been always competitive since their second season.
Exactly.
Whereas like the Warriors, it's more like, oh, they took 5 years to get to the playoffs. They made the grand finals after 6 years, and then they've made another grand finals a few years later. You're like, okay, that seems like an expansion team. Like that's really how well you can expect an expansion team to go.
Yeah, exactly.
And yeah, so like the if the PNG team are as about the level of the Warriors after 10 years, I'd be like, that's a success.
Yeah, yeah. No, exactly.
And like they're getting some concessions, so players who play for the PNG teams will have their salaries tax exempt
Yeah, yeah.
and things like that. So and that portion doesn't count towards salary. Obviously, effectively gives them a bigger salary cap. But it's fair because most of the players will be moving and shifting to move there, and if they after their contract they're moving back and things like that. I think it's fair enough.
Yeah, no, it's definitely fair enough.
And you will need to invest in if you move to New Guinea. Obviously, even if you live in one of those gated expat community areas in Port Moresby and whatnot, it's still going to be a huge culture shock,
Yeah, yeah.
and it's going to be like and it's going to take effort to move there.
Yeah, exactly.
But in the end, I think it'll be all the round ball codes are in an interesting position. Like I would be so interested to see how things turn out in the next matches. Like I think, like the next World Cup for rugby in Australia, which is this year,
No. Years time,
next
2027.
2027. Like that's so important, and like such play, it's gonna play such a, and it's arguably really important to New Zealand as well
Yeah.
to see how how the code will fare in the Pacific.
Yeah.
Because rugby league's already coming for every good athlete in the South Pacific,
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
and like the government's also given them money to do rugby league's thing in Samoa and Tonga as well,
Mm-hmm.
where obviously rugby league's also very popular along with Union.
Yeah.
And then you've got rugby league's next big plays are like how well this PNG franchise goes and what are they actually going to do about getting to 20 teams. And yeah, AFL are kind of just in that spot of like what's going to happen with Tasmania, and are we going to look to expand, or are we going to go shore up the areas we have and like open another franchise in Perth or Adelaide.
Yeah.
So all of them are in flux. All of them are in interesting positions. We'll definitely come back here next year and review what's happened and see how we go.
There we go.
Well, at least with NRL and AFL, their players' associations haven't done a better job of running the sport than the people who are meant to be running the sport.
Exactly.
This is literally, like people would say, oh, you're letting the inmates run the asylum. And like, yeah, but they're running the asylum better than the asylum managers were.
Exactly. They seem to actually know what's needed and like have a really great, benefit plan and like have started to organize people into
All
shifts and
we,
everything.
let's be fair, for all we know, the players' plans might not actually be that good. It's just better than what the people who are supposed to be paid to get those plans were.
Yeah. Oh, exactly.
Like the players' plans might still not be that good, but it's better than what the administration were planning.
Yeah.
So yeah, well, it's gonna be an interesting thing. Like, it's been an interesting 5 years since COVID for all these sports,
Mm.
and yeah, we'll definitely we'll see how it plays out. But yeah, on that note, I think that's all we have time for today. Thanks very much for listening, and look forward to seeing you next time.
Catch you next time.
Well, that is the end. Thanks for listening all the way through.
If you liked what you heard, we have even more. 9642 Discord and a Buy Me a Coffee.
Pretty sure it's Buy Me a Beer.
Oh yeah, buy me a beer on buymeacoffee.com.
In both these places, you can talk to us, and we may even listen, especially if you do buy a said beer or coffee. I might still be confused.
Yes, we're easily bribed. All links are in the show notes below.
Don't forget to like and subscribe.
This is on YouTube.